Before I get into my video, I wanted to point you to two other ones. One is by the Shogunate, and one is by Japan at War. These are the two that I know who did a video about this trailer. There could be others, I don't know. I did watch a little bit of the Shogunate's video because a little bit into it, I started thinking that maybe I would do a video of my own, and I stopped watching it. But I have not watched any of Japan at War's video because I didn't want them to influence my own opinions. So they may have opinions very different than mine. They may have, they may talk about different things than I did. So it's definitely worth giving them a look. And the links to the videos specifically about the trailer will be in the description below. But while you're there, I seriously suggest you check out both of their channels more thoroughly. They got some really interesting videos on there. If you're interested in samurai or Japanese history or any of that sort of stuff, they're definitely worth checking out. So now we'll start my portion of this video. Well, my content portion. Hey there, this video is going to be my thoughts, opinions, criticisms on the historical veracity of the trailer for the new Netflix series Age of Samurai: Battle for Japan. At the time of this recording, here in the United States, the series is not up on Netflix yet. So this is going to be based on just the trailer, not the actual episodes. And I do plan to watch at least the first episode to see how it is and decide from there if I will continue watching it. I will talk about things as they come up, and then at the end, I will give my overall thoughts about it, the trailer. When I restart the video after I talk about a certain section, I will go back some to avoid missing things. I just want to say that so that the skipping back and repeating things is explained. Also, this is not the first time I have seen this trailer, so it is not a spontaneous reaction. I'm going to have to leave out a lot of explanation, or else this video will be far too long. So feel free to ask questions in the comments section below. This is my fourth or fifth time recording this, because when I just talked off the top of my head, even with trying to limit myself, the recordings range from 30 to 40 minutes roughly. This one is a more structured version with a ton of stuff left out because I just cannot fit it all in. Needless to say, these are my opinions and just that. They may change after I watch the first episode, or they may not. Let's get into the trailer, shall we?
1551. Japan is in chaos. Anarchy reigns as heavily armed warlords fight for power and territory.
I will talk about the 1551 part later in this video because I think it will make more sense then. Heavily armed warlords gives the impression that it was the wealthy and powerful daimyo, which they were the ones who became famous, so it's not surprising that it seems that those are who this series is probably going to focus on. However, even local samurai were trying to protect or expand their territory, and also their direct or indirect power and authority. Many samurai of all levels of status would engage in military, political, economic, and so on means in order to achieve this. And I just wanted to bring that up so that it was clear that it wasn't just the daimyo types who were doing such things. I'm pretty sure that these guys are meant to be samurai. The shikoro on the back of the helmet, the rivets on the top, and the attachment for a decorative maedate in the front would make this helmet expensive. It's not really fitting for ashigaru, non-samurai status foot soldiers, unless it was scavenged off a dead or dying samurai after a battle. Now, in the series, maybe they are actually ashigaru. If so, it seems like they are outfitting them much nicer than ashigaru would historically have been outfitted. But we will get into the armor stuff a little bit later in more detail. I think they are meant to be samurai, though. The idea of a gun unit of samurai status in the Sengoku period is not accurate. There are some samurai that carried matchlocks, teppo, into battle as a personal weapon, although I cannot think of any for whom it was the main weapon. And there are records of samurai killing enemies with teppo. However, much of like the yumi, the bow, the teppo was used mostly by the ashigaru. Samurai with teppo were the exception rather than the rule, so a whole unit of them really doesn't fit. We are now going to talk a little bit about swords. I will try to keep it as short as possible though. I do plan to make a video later devoted just to swords, and this video is not the place to go over all of that stuff. This guy is wearing a katana, the sword which probably most people think of as the samurai sword. On 16th century battlefields though, those wielding katana, or rather uchi katana, would have been ashigaru, or fairly poor samurai. Here are just a few images to illustrate how the uchi-katana and then katana were worn. It was usually worn edge up, slid into the sash or belt tied around the waist. The uchi-katana was originally a cheap sword to be used by foot soldiers. By the 16th century, though, some samurai started to wear higher quality versions of the uchi-katana design as their daily sword while in regular clothing, and carried their tachi only on the battlefield. This was not universal, though, and it probably would have still been pretty common to see many samurai wearing tachi in daily attire. Eventually, the uchi-katana would become the katana, and the default daily wear longsword for the samurai in the Edo period. And in time, it would be what most people would think of when they think of a samurai sword. These images are of tachi. This was the main sword of the samurai from the 10th to the 16th centuries, with some high-ranking samurai, and especially daimyo, still wearing them until the late 19th century. On the rare occasions they wore armor. It was worn edge down, originally hanging from the waist. By the 16th century, though, it became common for a tachi to be secured to the waist rather than left hanging freely, in order to keep it from getting in the way, as it became more common for samurai to fight on foot. This was accomplished through various tying methods or by using an accessory called a koshiate. These methods would also sometimes be used to wear a katana in tachi style, with the cutting edge down. And something about swordsmanship in general. There is too much swordsmanship in the trailer. The sword was not the primary battlefield weapon. In most cases, it was a secondary backup weapon. In the 16th century, the main weapons for ashigaru would have been yumi, teppo, and yari, spears or pikes. I prefer to translate it as pikes. And the main weapon for the samurai was usually the yari. Some might have preferred to use a sword, and there were some different kinds of swords and sword-like weapons that could have been used. In addition, there were also other types of weapons that ashigaru and samurai might have used, but those would not have been the main weapons in the 16th century. In the trailer, again, the actual series might be different. It looks like all the samurai are using katana as their melee weapons, and other than the gunners I talked about before, as their primary weapon, which is not historically accurate.
In the Sengoku period, there were no more rules. This was all-out battle for control of Japan.
I'm going to talk about a few things here because I don't want to pause it too many times in a short period. One thing, the guy that is supposed to be Oda Nobunaga gives the order to fire in Japanese. When I heard this was going to be from Netflix, I was certain it would all be in English. The only English in the trailer is from the commentators. So that's a plus that it seems that the series is going to be in Japanese. That jumping cut, I know a lot of people would think it looks cool, but it's not something I think one would see on the battlefield. But in a number of ways, the combat in this trailer is questionable. This clothing. These sleeves are more like later kimono sleeves, the big, open, square-type sleeves. To be fair, any clothing can really be called kimono, since kimono literally means thing you wear, thing to wear, something along those lines. There are a number of types of clothing men could wear in the 16th century, depending on their wealth and status. But these sleeves are more like clothing that would develop in the Edo period. And especially for this particular individual, he doesn't seem to be very wealthy. And clothing with that much fabric would be more expensive. So that's something to keep in mind too. But clothing is another topic I would like to make a future video on. This hairstyle really annoyed me when I first saw it, and it still makes me shake my head. This tuft of hair on top with a long tail, just no. Not a Sengoku period hairstyle. Especially for someone who seems to be a samurai.
In the Sengoku period, there were no more rules. This was all-out battle for control of Japan.
The armor in this trailer is largely not that good in my opinion. Some of the samurai armor at a distance does not look too bad, but in close-ups it doesn't look so good either. There are some samurai whose armor looks like leather. Now in some cases, historically, samurai might cover their armor with leather for more protection, but even the helmets sometimes look like they're made of leather. And the non-samurai armor, that ugly studded leather stuff being kept together with strings, that is just horrible. I do not even know who they're supposed to be. Are they supposed to be Ashigaru, Nobushi, Akuto, bandits? What? I have no idea who those people are supposed to represent. If they are supposed to be Ashigaru, here are some images of better looking and more historically accurate armor for Ashigaru. Now it is true that Ashigaru were often poorly armored for a good portion of the Sengoku period. However, since this seems to be the late 16th century and focusing on a few certain individuals, the Ashigaru should be better armored. I mean, even if they wanted to use leather armor. Studded leather? Nah, that's just not good. It would have been better to just have simple leather haraate if they were going to go that route. Although even that would be kind of awkward, but at least it wouldn't be studded leather. And one more thing to say is how easily this guy gets shot in the back. Look at the blood splatter and how the arrow just goes in. It might be nitpicking too much, but as someone interested in this kind of stuff, I am tired of seeing armor that only works when the script says it does. This includes movies and documentaries in almost any time period they wore armor, and from any culture where it was used. Arrows, swords, all that stuff just go through and into armor like it was nothing, unless the script says otherwise. It gets a bit annoying, but I can let it go to some degree at least in movies. I think documentaries should do better though.
You have the men who are going to shape the destiny of Japan coming together. Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Masamune, and Tokugawa Ieyasu.
Now I will talk about the 1551 thing. That is the only year mentioned specifically in the trailer. I'm not sure why. My guess is that this series is going to probably cover from 1551-ish to perhaps Sekigahara in 1600 or a little after that, or maybe as late as the fall of Osaka and the annihilation of the Toyotomi in 1615. If this guess is correct, this show is covering only a tiny snippet of centuries worth of samurai history, culture, and warfare, which is fine in itself. I focus my studies on the 14th to early 17th centuries. Although I study more than just that period, I do focus on it. However, the 50 or 60-ish year period this show would cover, if I am correct, is not fully representative of the age of the samurai. It is just a short period at the end of the Sengoku period. But I could be wrong. That is the impression I'm getting though. And the trailer does not talk about passage of time, so it seems like all this is in the year 1551. However, in the year 1551, Nobunaga would have been around 17, Hideyoshi roughly 14, Ieyasu around 8, and Masamune would not even be born for another 16 or so years. So in 1551, they certainly were not coming together. But I think this is poor editing. Clearly, this is from a later part in the series, but they splice it in here. And since 1551 is the only year mentioned specifically, and it doesn't show any passage of time, it looks a little bit odd. And of course, they have to portray Nobunaga like a wild man. When he was young, he did have a reputation as a bit of a delinquent, sure, but much like his cruelty, this aspect has often been emphasized and exaggerated in depictions of Nobunaga. Another thing that is often played up is his westernization. We will have to wait to see, though, how the series actually portrays him. This sequence of Hideyoshi running through the battle, slicing enemies with a katana, left and right, nah. It certainly looks out of place. It's hard to tell how old he's supposed to be at this point in the series, but he is an adult and he looks to be of a high rank. Again, this is something that looks cool, but I have serious doubts that Hideyoshi would still be fighting in the frontline combat at this point. And this is another thing, though, that we will have to wait until the series comes out to find out just what part of his life this scene is supposed to come from.
Samurai combat is more brutal than anyone can imagine.
Combat. The level of brutality on Japanese battlefields would be pretty much on par with medieval European battlefields. Some elements did differ, of course, and in some ways one might be worse than the other, but overall similar in the level of brutality and violence. Melee warfare is brutal, nasty, and visceral. You can feel the enemy's breath. You can feel the resistance and then give as your weapon sinks into their body, possibly even getting blood splatter on your own skin. gurgling sounds as they choke on their blood, cries of the wounded and dying, stench of urine and feces as the muscles of the already dead give out and release whatever's inside. Like all war, it was ugly, and this was very face-to-face. The combat in this trailer leaves a lot to be desired. It looks like they were more interested in appealing to people and making it look cool than being accurate. In the actual episodes, it might end up being better, but the trailer does not give me much hope that we will be seeing realistic depictions of combat. One thing I want to mention is how all the main characters do not wear kabuto, or helmets, in this trailer. It is ridiculous that they would go into battle like that anyways, but especially without wearing a helmet. But from a filming standpoint, I kind of understand. You see this in movies a lot too, because you want the audience to see and know who the main characters are. So helmets make it kind of tough. Although in Japan, kabuto were also very individualized, especially for samurai of their rank. So they could have worn kabuto totally different to set themselves apart, and it would have looked at least a little bit better.
These assassins, spies, and agents were not to be trifled with.
Of course, anything with samurai has to have ninja in it. Raise your hand if you cringed a little bit. Now, I certainly do agree that there were special operative types in the Sengoku period. However, there is so much that has been piled up around the Shinobi no Mono that most people believe a lot of things that just were not true. For the most part, they were intelligence operatives and perhaps saboteurs. They did not go around in black outfits carrying all kinds of exotic weapons on them, or any of that nonsense. If they did their job right, most of the time they looked like anybody else. They would operate in broad daylight, out in the open, and nobody would know any better. For decades, part of their role in warfare and history has been known to historians and other researchers. But there are still issues. There is way too much about them to get into here, and I do plan on getting into this in a future video. I just wanted to bring up how stereotypical it is that ninja would show up, and they will probably get a lot about them wrong. Why? Because ninja are cool, and portraying the cool image of ninja gets more attention than the historical.
These are the greatest warriors history's ever known.
The wheels were now set in motion for the most decisive struggle for power in the whole of Japanese history. The real battle for Japan was about to begin.
I'm not going to deny that this was a major turning point in Japanese history, but I do think that there are other ones as well. I also think that this kind of hypes it up a bit too much perhaps, but maybe not. I mean, it was a really big deal. And again, this is coming from somebody who part of my period focus includes this. As I said, I focus on the 14th and early 17th centuries, but even within that, my main focus really is the Sengoku period of the 15th and 16th centuries. I can kind of understand this being hyped up though, because it seems like they're focusing on the late 16th century, the end of the 16th century. So they want to get the audience interested and excited to watch about this period that they're going to be covering. And in some ways, it is kind of warranted. The majority of famous samurai probably come from this period. There are some major battles in this period. In Japanese samurai movies, the most common period they are set in is the Edo period, followed by the late 16th century. When I was living in Japan, books about Sengoku period samurai were extremely popular, and also just in a bit of pop culture, the Rekijo, or history girls, they were starting to kind of become a thing. And those were girls that were really interested in Japanese history, and particularly Sengoku samurai. So, there is a lot of, this period is one that interests a lot of people and does get a lot of attention. And even with that, there is still a lot of things to be studied and learned about the period. So I just want to bring this up for people watching, that there are plenty of other struggles for the power over Japan and a lot of other important events. And some of them that happened well before this period. There's just a lot of interesting things to learn about outside of the 16th century within Japanese history as well. So hopefully if this type of stuff interests you, I hope that you will look into more about it. One thing I cannot comment on is the commentary. There is not enough of it here to judge, and it's just voiceovers. Some of it seems a little hyping things up, and some of it seems out of place. The out of place could just be because of editing, and they stuck the voices over parts of the trailer, even if it doesn't really fit with what's going on the screen. One thing to remember is that historical documentaries are almost always targeted at people with little to no knowledge about the subject. So the producers often focus on very broad things, chop up interviews, and sometimes even rely too much on tropes and stereotypes when I think they should know and do better if they're going to call it a documentary. Although we have already seen some of this in the trailer, hopefully the actual episodes will do better about that. Although producers tend to be more interested in views than accuracy because that's where the money is. In terms of what could be called the reenactment part, I do not have very high expectations based on what I have seen in this trailer. I have questions if the reenactment part will have at least a historically authentic, which is different than historically accurate, representation of 16th century history, society, culture, or warfare. I do hope that the actual show is better than the trailer makes it look to me and exceeds my expectations. Again, though, this is really meant for a general audience with little to no knowledge of the topic, not for someone like me who has spent years studying it. This looks like it might be heading more towards docudrama territory than documentary. However, I do suggest anyone with Netflix and an interest in samurai to give it a watch and see for yourselves. I hope that even if what I said before is the case, the commentary will at least be interesting. Sometimes even complete fiction can open up new interests and make people interested in studying things. Perhaps someday I will tell how I got interested in all this. But for now, I am skeptically optimistic. I do not have high expectations and I have plenty of doubts, but I do hope that the end result is higher than I expect. At the very least, I hope the commentary will be interesting and the program will be entertaining with some historical authenticity in it. Thank you so much for watching this video. This was a completely new type of video for me, so I probably messed up a lot of things. And even now as I'm recording the outro, I can think of so many things that I could have done to make it better. But please leave your comments, criticisms, and questions in the comments below. I do read all of them. If you like this video, please consider leaving a thumbs up. I would also appreciate it if you consider subscribing for content focused on the world of medieval Japan and the samurai. Links to the version of the trailer I used, as well as a couple other videos I use still shots from, are in the description. And a reminder, links to the Shogunate and Japan at War's videos are also down in the description. There are also links to the channel's Twitter and ways to support it if you want. Again, thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you'll come back for the next one. Soreja, bye for now.